welcome. You're in for a treat tonight. I'm with Martin Ludden, who has been the executive director at SPNN, the St. Paul Neighborhood Network, for the last 6 years. And he is now leaving that post. So we're going to talk now tonight about his time here at SPNN, about cable, some of his honest thoughts about where it's going, where it's been, and some about his life. So stay with us, you'll enjoy it. Welcome, Martin.
Thanks, Mary. It's good to be here.
Yeah, it's fun to have you on. You're such a pro yourself as an interviewer, so I've got to be on my toes here.
We'll keep it easy.
I'll be easy on you too. 6 years is not a long time, but you had the COVID years.
Yep.
And just a lot of disruption with life. And how do you sort of view these 6 years in terms of, has it felt like a fast 6 or a slow 6 or?
I think when I stop and look back at the entirety of it, it feels like a really long time. But in the moments, it was like nothing at all. It was so fast. And it's, I mean, as a parent, what do they say? The days are long, but the years are short.
Yes, that's a great quote.
And I think it was a similar feel.
Oh, I've not heard that quote,
Yeah.
but it's a great quote. It's apropos too, isn't it? He and I were talking about the fact that when you've got a busy job, you're often not able to reflect back. And now he's got a little time to do that, perhaps. And if you look back, what do you think you learned from working here at SPNN that you'll take with you?
Yeah. I mean, they didn't hire me for video media expertise,
Right.
although I did get to learn some of that. There was some learning by osmosis about how all of this stuff works. But I think the leadership lessons are probably the biggest carry through. I had time in the military as a leader. I was a manager in a corporate setting, but not of people. And this was kind of my first executive role and my first position where the buck stops with me. And that coming in, I don't know that I entirely understood the responsibility that goes with that. I mean, you can understand it academically, but when you sit down in the chair and you're that's a whole different feeling.
And you get to know people's needs and wants and how if things don't go well and you need to let them go. I mean, all those kind of
all of that
backstory things, right?
Yeah, and I mean, I was lucky here to have a really incredible team that was hugely supportive, and we were on the same page. So that made it easier. I think my first annual meeting, a month or two after I started, and I probably said it at every annual event thereafter, that I wouldn't still be standing up here if it weren't for Bonnie and Steve, probably. And they're both still here.
Give us their last names so we can have a shout out to them.
Bonnie Schumacher and Steve Brunsberg.
Right.
Bonnie is the deputy executive director and runs the program team, and Steve is the director of production and facilities, and Steve is kind of the guy who keeps everything running behind the scenes.
Yeah, they're both fantastic.
Yeah. And Steve's been here 30 years, Bonnie's been here 20.
Wow, so 50 total.
Yeah, so when I talk about 6 not being, there's a lot of institutional memory here.
In their eyes, 6 is, you're still an infant in the cable business. But SPNN has, as a cable system, just been a stellar system in Minnesota.
Yep.
I mean, you must be so proud to have been part of it.
Yeah.
A lot of cable systems, as a lot of you know, have kind of fallen by the wayside in a sense. And yet the mission here is unique. And how do you define it, just in a brief
We have like our
statement?
the mission statement is SPNN uses, oh man, I gotta come back with it off the top of my head. Enables people to use enables people to use media and technology to build better lives, make better lives, build common understanding, and use authentic voice. And I think that's a decent mission statement, but it comes back to kind of our tagline is building community through media. And when I think about the work that we did and that I've done here, I don't think about it as cable so much as more of a community building endeavor. And media and cable are the vehicle, but we're really trying to build community. And I think we do that really well.
I agree. And you specifically have worked with people who aren't always the leaders and shakers, but the people who are learning to use cable and learning to use media, right?
Yeah, and I think we have tried really hard to be inclusive. And I think that's, in the broadest reading of that word. And that's racially, it's socioeconomically, it's culturally, so that folks feel comfortable being here, because you have to feel comfortable if you want to do good creative work. So making sure that people feel comfortable enough and safe enough to do that work here. And also, like, making sure that folks that may not feel safe or comfortable anywhere else have a home here. Because there are plenty of places for people to learn some of this video stuff, but making sure that this is a place where everybody feels welcome.
And that's not the case all over town, is it?
I can't. I'm sure that somebody who looks like me would feel comfortable walking into pretty much any cable access space, any film space, and feel pretty comfortable. But that's not who we need to serve here.
Right. The mission statement is impressive, and can you restate it?
Yeah. SPNN's mission is to empower people to use media and technology to make better lives, build common understanding, and use authentic voice. And I think, that's the long version. The sort of the tagline of it is we build community through media. And that's what centers the work that I felt good about here. It's not necessarily cable, it's community building. And media and video and the cable side of it is the vehicle to build community. And I think that's something we've done really well here.
I agree that you have, and you've really brought in a lot of people of color, a lot of people with real diverse backgrounds, and that makes it exciting as a place to come and work.
Yeah.
Just in the sense of cable as a business, as part of our community. Years ago when I started out, and we figured out I was starting when he was born, which is a little daunting to think about, but there was a man in cable here back in 1980 named John Eddy, who was executive director just like you, except he had one place to work only, and that was Fridley. And he said, Mary, if you're going to be in cable, you have to learn to ride loose in the saddle. And I never forgot that, because so many changes hit cable from left and right, up and down, and yet it keeps on going.
Right.
Do you think we still can see it keeping on going indefinitely?
I don't think anything goes indefinitely. I mean, not a horse doesn't. That's for sure.
That's true.
Like, I am not a comfortable horseman. I think the last time, one of the few times I was riding, I actually got laughed at by another party
Oh, no.
Because I think I was not riding loose in the saddle.
You were
Yeah.
pulling too hard on the reins or something.
I probably looked stiff as a board. But yeah, I think cable has changed a lot. I mean, I remember as a very little kid when we first got cable in we were in Minneapolis at the time, but it was like a 10-button remote that was about this big. Mm-hmm. And then I actually worked at Comcast for a time from I think 2011-ish until 2016. And even in those, 4 and change years, we went from that kind of blue scrolling guide to this like fantastic X1 system thing, and and it keeps changing at that level. And I think in the cable access space, the key is to continue finding ways to stay relevant, because when cable access first started, the gear was prohibitively expensive. It was prohibitively heavy.
Yes.
And the only way
only for the strong muscled people, right?
Well, and the funny thing is that culture has carried in video, that it's this kind of jock, really male-dominated kind of jockey locker room culture that's not super healthy for a lot of folks to work in, for anybody to work in.
Right.
And the only way to get eyes on what you would produce with this expensive, heavy stuff was to put it on cable. So that was the space for that. And now I have a device in my pocket that I carry with me everywhere I go that shoots 4K video, and I can put it on YouTube or Twitter or Facebook or TikTok or Instagram, like right now.
Yeah.
So why do I need to come to SPNN? And I think that's a question SPNN has answered well. Not everybody has. So it's, I think that's a key to SPNN's longevity, and what will keep SPNN around is we find creative ways to answer that.
So it's really looking for the greater, the cause, the value that helps people, really, isn't it? That's maybe been a key to the SPNN success, would you say?
Yeah, and it's about finding people and being responsive to where they are. So just because I can shoot 4K video on my iPhone doesn't mean that it's going to be good.
Mm-hmm.
So
you might think it's real good, but
so people still need to learn how to create a compelling story arc. They still need to learn how to light it. They still need to learn how to get good audio. And SPNN teaches that on a mobile phone, like on a mobile, filmmaking kind of process. We also still teach them more traditional, we have a pretty modern fleet of different video cameras that folks would find if they were to go do this professionally. So that's one of the ways that we stay relevant, is making sure that people have that. And then when we hear from members, like, I want to learn how to make a documentary. Okay, we'll start DocU.
Yeah,
and we'll teach people how to do documentaries. Yeah,
that's been a big part of SPNN the last few years, hasn't it?
And I'm, it's when you're in that top role, you can take credit for everything. You shouldn't necessarily. Like you take credit for the faults sometimes, and you shine the light on your team for the good stuff. But that's something I've been particularly proud of, is the way the documentary track has grown.
So you've been a big cheerleader, haven't you?
Yeah, well, and frankly, I've been smart enough to listen to the team here that says we have another documentary cohort program that we can do. And it's like, great, let's do it.
I've come to some of the documentary show and tell nights, and it's amazing, some of the documentaries that have come out of here. And what a gift to young filmmakers, and not so young sometimes, who are taking advantage of that. I'm sure some people sitting back and listening, Martin, are saying, okay, so how do they get funded? This all sounds expensive.
It is.
Can you explain just briefly how
So
that
overall,
works?
SPNN gets funding in the way the Lotta Cable Access operation gets funding. So about half of it comes through the cable franchise. We get a percentage of cable television revenue from the city of St. Paul.
What's the percentage now?
2.5, I think.
Is that it
Yeah,
now?
and the city takes a small chunk of that to run the government access channel, and the rest comes to SPNN. That pool, that pot of money has decreased. It went down 30% in my time.
Oh my
So
gosh.
from
That's
just
a s-
over $1 million to about
Oh
700,000.
my gosh, that's a
Yeah.
huge job.
Yep. And that's as people shift over to streaming from traditional cable
Right,
television.
right.
SPNN doesn't get a percentage of streaming. So that's that bucket. The way we fund most of the documentary programs is kind of your traditional institutional philanthropy. So it's McKnight, it's so the McKnight Foundation, the Jerome Foundation, the National Endowment for the Arts. I think those are the big three on the documentary side. And then we have a new partnership with the R.J. Christensen Foundation of the St. Paul and Minnesota Foundation. I think that's the right that's the right
Did I
name
get
on
that
that.
right there?
Yep.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, so that's really important, isn't it, though, the foundation support?
Yep, and that's been a big boost because those documentary cohort programs, they cost us money to put them on and to make sure they're, equipped with state-of-the-art stuff.
Right.
But they also don't cost the participants anything. And we actually pay a stipend to all of our documentary
That's
cohort
right, I
participants.
remember
so
that.
that's kind of an additional cost on that.
Yes.
But that's part of SPNN's philosophy on those.
A few of the topics, can you mention just
Oh,
some
man.
of the things they've done documentaries on? Because there have been a
One that-
wide range, of
yeah,
course, but
there's a couple that stick, and these are both from the New Angle Fellows, which is a program for emerging artists, and that doesn't mean that they're just starting. Emerging artists are, we'll call them early career. This, but career. This is something they're
So
going to do.
serious.
Yeah, they have been doing the documentaries that come out of NAF are phenomenal. But there's Kelly Wong did one about her family's last name. And I'm going to get the specifics wrong, but the heart of it was that when her family immigrated, they adopted a different last name from a different culture. And so she went back and tried to figure out, like, where did we get this name? What name had we used previous? And kind of what are the implications, both not legally, because that was all done, but like, what are the cultural implications of taking on this different name? And what are we losing? And that was fascinating to hear her talk about that. I talk a lot about Adrian Wilson's documentary, A Letter to Bryson, which was him kind of in first person and through interviews navigating the uprisings after the murder of George Floyd. And he did it as a historical document for his son, Bryson. So
who was just a baby
yeah,
then,
who was
right?
2 or 3.
Yes.
Yeah. So that that's just a couple. There's so much good work has come out of those, and you can find them on YouTube.
Yes, and to find them on YouTube, do you just put in SPNN documentaries?
My
or-
SPNN on YouTube, and all one word, and then there should be playlists and pages for the different documentary programs.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
We could talk a lot about other exciting things going on here, and we can maybe come back to that. But I want to be sure to ask you a little bit about your time in Iraq.
Yeah.
Because I personally don't know anybody who's been in Iraq.
Yeah.
And he had 2 tours there, and the second one was a combat kind of a mission, wasn't it?
They were. So I was in the Army Reserve from April of 01 through June of 10, so just over 9 years. And my unit deployed 03, 04, and then 09 and 10. And we actually, it's maybe a funny way to put it, we got shot at a lot more the first tour than we did the second.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Okay,
and they
I
were,
was reversing the two.
The first tour, we came in just after the invasion. We weren't part of that initial push. And we were in Bakuba, which is, I think, the southeast corner of the Sunni Triangle. And it was a pretty volatile place to be. and we lost 4 guys from our unit on that tour, and we had, I think, 25 wounded. And on the second tour, I think we had one guy caught and threw a flashbang grenade that somebody tossed at him, and that was the extent of our contact.
There were no injuries or no serious injuries.
Yeah.
I guess I'm curious, Martin, how being in that kind of a tough and scary and dangerous situation, how that gave you some clues on leadership that you've used now in regular kind of life. Is there some transference that was obvious to you, or?
Absolutely.
Yes?
Yeah, there's a couple, and one that I keep talking about, that I was a staff sergeant when I got out, so that's a non-commissioned officer, and one of my NCOs told me that, an Army leader's job has 2 parts. You accomplish the mission and you take care of your people. And usually if you take care of the people, the mission will probably accomplish itself. And that's something that I've really kept. And I think in a military situation, when those 2 jobs come in conflict, you're actually talking about putting people at risk of bodily harm, right? And in a more civilian context, like I don't have, as an executive director here, I wasn't ever going to put somebody in a place to do physical harm, but I did have people's livelihoods,
in some of their emotional health.
And so that, those conflicts happen, and we were in a spot in 2018 when we had to do some restructuring, and we had to lay 3 people off, and that was really hard. That was one of the hardest things I've ever done professionally. And that was a place where those 2 things were in conflict. We had to let some people go in order to continue to accomplish the mission. And that was really hard. So that's something that I'll always carry. The other side of it was learning quickly, because the way we deployed the second time, it was 2 units that got mashed together and sent. So my squad that I worked with for that whole deployment, I had never met most of them.
Oh, wow.
And had to do some real quick trust building.
And there were like 30 guys?
So my squad was 11. When we were doing a big, when we were actually doing like a bridging mission, because I was a bridge engineer, I may have been in a place where I was in charge of that many folks in a mission, like a discrete mission.
Okay.
But my day-to-day was 11.
Okay.
And learning how to kind of make those connections deep enough to be an effective leader quickly carried too. And I learned that, I had some soldiers under me that clearly had bad experiences with leaders in the past.
I'm sure.
And to find ways to show them that I had their back was huge, and if it was, sticking up for somebody or being fair in consequences if somebody does something wrong, but really showing them that I had their back broadly and that I was going to keep them in line, generally. And here, you don't have, it's a very different system, but finding ways to show the team that I had their back and showing up and being present, doing some of that. I used to laugh about it, but leadership by walking around, and showing up to events, asking people how things are going, doing that kind of, making those connections, that definitely carries.
Well, so a real, as you said, a very direct transference, wasn't there? That's really interesting. I mean, it sort of shows that no matter what your job previously, there will be something that will help you from that job in your next job, probably.
Yep.
Well, we only have 5 minutes left, so.
That went fast.
Speaking of next steps in your life, what are you kind of looking for or considering at this point?
For right now, I'm going to Michigan for the whole month of July with my family. And we're going to be on
fabulous.
vacation. on a beach and in the woods and just hanging out. I have 2 boys, they're 8 and 10, and I'm looking forward to some really good lake time with them.
Yeah, what a great age
Oh yeah,
to do
they
this
still want to
with
hang
them.
out.
Yes, exactly.
And then starting in August, I'll be launching a consulting practice, doing some work, looking primarily to do interim executive director work. So coming in on a short-term basis, if the previous executive has been has parted ways, or if they got a fabulous job offer and had to leave in a hurry. So filling that gap while the organization works through the transition, making sure to keep staff engaged, keep the lights on, keep the wheels on.
That sounds like a really logical kind of a role for you after what you've done.
Yeah, and it'll should give me a little bit of breathing room,
Yeah.
some recharge space, and
Yeah.
someday in the future may look for a full-time role like this again, and we'll see how that goes.
Well, you've got, I don't think any worries about that. Is there anything here that you would say was the hardest, and maybe you've already spoken, letting people go is hard. Is there anything else that you would say, oh, that was a really hard part of being a director here?
Yeah, I think you're seeing conversations across the nonprofit sector right now talking about co-leadership, and finding ways for more than one person to shoulder that top role, because it's a really, and I was well prepared for it from the military side, because they draw very bright lines about keeping that kind of divide between staff and leadership, which I don't love, but it's a lonely seat, and there are certain things that you can't talk about with everybody. There are certain things that you can't talk about with anybody except probably your board chair.
Right.
So that's hard.
But that
Yeah.
that is something you see as a trend with future nonprofit in particular.
I think
kind
we
of
have to
leadership
go that way.
work.
Yeah, because
That's
it's
interesting.
in order to stay sustainable and not burn people out, I think that's like one release valve. That's one way to look at that.
You bring your strengths, and together we really strong.
Yeah.
I like that idea. That's kind of a new idea for me to ponder here, but
Yeah.
it sounds like you've got a jump on it already in terms of accepting the pros and cons, and mostly pros, perhaps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's always going to be a challenge with accountability. And we did some thinking and examining around that when I kind of announced that it was time to do a transition. And ultimately we decided to go with just a one-for-one replacement. And that's Xavier Vasquez is the new executive director.
Yes,
He's fantastic.
I wanted to get his name out there too. Tell us again.
Xavier Vasquez.
Yes.
I'm super excited to see what he does with SPNN.
Yeah, and your endorsement is so important and exciting for all of us. Well, thank you so much for the 6 years and for everything you've done to strengthen this wonderful center, and best of luck as you go forward. And we were talking about the need to reflect back too, and have some time for that too, Martin.
I hope so.
So, okay, thanks.
Thanks, Mary. This has been lovely.
Good. Thank you for joining us. I'll be back again next week. Until then, have a good week.